Resident Evil is an action, adventure, horror fiction video game-based media franchise created by Shinji Mikami and owned by the video game company Capcom. The franchise focuses around a series of survival horror video games, but has since branched out into comic books, novels and novelizations, sound dramas, a series of live-action films and animated sequels to the games, and a variety of associated merchandise, such as action figures. The overarching plot of the series focuses on multiple characters and their roles in recurring outbreaks of zombies and other monsters. Initially due to the release of the T-virus, a biological weapon created by the fictional Umbrella Corporation, the eponymous first game in the series was released in 1996 as a survival horror video game, but the franchise has since grown to encompass other video game genres. The series is a mix of action and horror film-inspired plot lines, exploration and puzzle solving, but from Resident Evil 4 onwards, the main series took a more third-person shooter approach with fewer puzzles and greater emphasis on gunplay and weapons upgrading. As of 2015, the video game series has sold 61 million units worldwide. It has become Capcom's biggest franchise in terms of sales and marked the start of the survival horror genre, which was already influenced by earlier efforts such as Sweet Home and the Alone in the Dark series. History. The survival horror video game Resident Evil made its debut on the PlayStation in 1996, and was later ported to the Sega Saturn. It was a critical and commercial success, leading to the production of two sequels, Resident Evil 2 in 1998 and Resident Evil 3. Nemesis in 1999, both for the PlayStation. A port of Resident Evil 2 was released for the Nintendo 64. In addition, ports of all three were released for Windows. The fourth game in the series, Resident Evil Code Veronica, was developed for the Sega Dreamcast and released in 2000, followed by ports of 2 and 3. Resident Evil Code Veronica was later re-released for Dreamcast in Japan in an updated form as Code Veronica Complete, which included slight changes, many of which revolved around story cutscenes. This updated version was later ported to the PlayStation 2 and GameCube under the title Code Veronica X. Despite earlier announcements that the next game in the series would be released for the PlayStation 2, which resulted in the creation of an unrelated game titled Devil May Cry, series creator and producer Shinji Mikami decided to make the series exclusively for the GameCube. The next three games in the series, a remake of the original Resident Evil and the prequel Resident Evil 0, both released in 2002, as well as Resident Evil 4, were all released initially as GameCube exclusives. Resident Evil 4 was later released for Windows, PlayStation 2 and Wii. In addition, the GameCube received ports of the previous Resident Evil sequels. Despite this exclusivity agreement between Capcom and Nintendo, Capcom released several Resident Evil titles for the PlayStation 2 that were not considered direct sequels. A trilogy of Gun-Con-compatible light gun games known as the Gun Survivor series featured first-person gameplay. The first, Resident Evil Survivor, was released in 2000 for the PlayStation and PC, but received mediocre reviews. The subsequent games, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica and Resident Evil Dead Aim, fared somewhat better. Dead Aim is actually the fourth Gun Survivor game in Japan, with Gun Survivor 3 being the Dino Crisis spin-off Dino Stalker. In a similar vein, the Chronicles series features first-person gameplay, albeit on an on-rails path. Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles was released in 2007 for the Wii, with a follow-up, Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, released in 2009. Resident Evil Outbreak is an online game for the PlayStation 2, released in 2003. depicting a series of episodic storylines in Raccoon City, set during the same time period as Resident Evil 2 and 3. It was the first in the series and the first survival horror title to feature cooperative gameplay and online multiplayer support. It was followed by a sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File No. 2. Raccoon City is a metropolis located in the Arklay Mountains of North America that succumbed to the deadly T-virus outbreak and was consequently destroyed via a nuclear missile attack issued by the United States government. The town served a critical junction for the series' progression as one of the main catalysts to Umbrella's downfall, as well as the entry point for some of the series' most notable characters. Resident Evil Gaiden is an action-adventure game for the Game Boy Color featuring an RPG-style combat system. There have also been several downloadable mobile games based on the Resident Evil series in Japan. Some of these mobile games have been released in North America and Europe through T-Mobile. At the Sony press conference during the E3 2009, it was announced that Resident Evil Portable would be released for the PlayStation Portable, described as an all-new title being developed with the PSP Go in mind, and totally different for a Resident Evil game. However, as of 2012, no further announcements have been made, and the game is considered to have been cancelled. In March 2011, Capcom revealed the third-person shooter Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, which was developed by Slant 6 Games for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and Microsoft Windows, and released in March 2012. A survival horror game for the Nintendo 3DS, Resident Evil Revelations, was released in February 2012. In October of the same year, the next numbered entry in the main series, Resident Evil 6, was released to mixed reviews, but enthusiastic pre-order sales. HD Collections released HD ports of Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Code Veronica X, Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, and Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. In 2013, producer Masachika Kawata said the Resident Evil franchise would return to focus on elements of horror and suspense over action, adding, "Survival horror as a genre is never going to be on the same level, financially, as shooters and much more popular, mainstream games. At the same time, I think we need to have confidence to put money behind these projects. And it doesn't mean we can't focus on what we need to do as a survival horror game to meet fans' needs." Resident Evil Revelations 2, an episodic game set between Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, was released in March 2015. A team-based multiplayer game set in the series' universe, Umbrella Corps, was set to be released in 2016. Games Media. The Resident Evil franchise features video games and tie-in merchandise and products, including various films, comic books and novels. Comics. In 1997, Marvel Comics published a single-issue prologue comic based on the original Resident Evil, released through a promotional giveaway alongside the original PlayStation game. In 1998, Wildstorm began producing a monthly comic book series based on the first two games, titled Resident Evil, the official comic magazine, which lasted 5 issues. The first 4 issues were published by Image, while the 5th and final issue was published by Wildstorm themselves. Each issue was a compilation of short stories that were both adaptations of events from the games, as well as related side stories. Like the Perry novels, the comics also explored events occurring beyond Resident Evil 2 and thus were contradicted by later games. Wildstorm also published a 4-issue miniseries titled Resident Evil Fire and Ice, which depicted the ordeal of Charlie Team, a third Stars team created specifically for the comic. In 2009, Wildstorm reprinted Fire and Ice in a trade paperback collection. In Hong Kong, there has been officially licensed Biohazard manhwa adaptations of Biohazard 3 and Code Veronica by Lee Chung-hing. The latter was translated into English and published by Wildstorm as a series of 4 graphic novel collections. In 2009, Wildstorm began publishing a comic book prequel to Resident Evil 5, simply titled Resident Evil, which centers around 2 original members of the BSAA named Mina Gear and Holiday Sugarman. Written by Ricardo Sanchez and illustrated by Kevin Sharp and Jim Clark, the first issue was published on March 11, 2009. On November 11, 2009, the 3rd issue was released and the 4th was released March 24, 2010. The 6th and final book was finally published in February 2011. Films. Live-action films. 5 live-action films have been released under the title of Resident Evil. These films do not follow the game's premise but do feature some game characters, and were all written and produced by Paul W. S. Anderson. The series' protagonist is Alice, an original character created for these films. Despite her negative reaction from critics, the live-action film series has made over $900 million worldwide. They are, to date, the only video game adaptations to increase the amount of money made with each successive film. The series holds the record for the most live-action film adaptations of a video game in the 2012 Guinness World Records Gamers Edition, which also described it as the most successful movie series to be based on a video game of Resident Evil. Resident Evil Apocalypse, Resident Evil Extinction, Resident Evil Afterlife, Resident Evil Retribution, Resident Evil The Final Chapter. Animated films. 2 CGI movies have been produced based on the video game series rather than the film franchise, starring Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield and Ada Wong, as well as original characters new to the canon. Resident Evil Degeneration, Resident Evil Damnation. In addition, there is a standalone short film, Biohazard 4D Executor, that was exclusively released to Japanese audiences in 2000. The official Resident Evil Facebook account recommended Strike to Burn Productions fan film Resident Evil Red Falls that takes place between Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. We love seeing all sorts of Resident Evil creations which our fans make. This 50-minute fan film is one of the most impressive merchandise over the years. Various toy companies have acquired the Resident Evil license and each producing their own unique line of Resident Evil action figures or models. These include, but not limited to, Toy Biz, Palisades Toys, NECA and Hot Toys. Tokyo Marui also produced replicas of the guns used in the Resident Evil series in the form of gas blowback airsoft guns. Some models included the Stars Beretta featured in Resident Evil 3, and the Desert Eagle in a limited edition that came with other memorabilia in a wooden case, along with the gold Lugers from Code Veronica and the Samurai Edge pistol from the Resident Evil remake. Other merchandise includes an energy drink called T-Virus Antidote. Resident Evil Archives is a reference guide of the Resident Evil series written by staff members of Capcom. It was translated into English and published by Brady Games. Veronica. Along with the main plot analysis, it also contains character relationship charts, artwork, item descriptions and file transcripts for all 5 games. A second archives book was later released in December 2011 and covers Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5, the new scenarios detailed in Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles and Resident Evil, The Dark Side Chronicles, and the 2008 CGI movie, Resident Evil Degeneration. The second archives volume was also translated by Capcom and published by Brady Games. Resident Evil theme restaurant Biohazard Cafe and Grill STARS opened in Tokyo in 2012. Halloween Horror Nights 2013, held at Universal Orlando, featured a haunted house titled Resident Evil Escape from Raccoon City, based on Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. Nemesis Novels. The earliest Resident Evil novel was Hiroyuki Araga's novella Biohazard, The Beginning, published in 1997 as a portion of the book The True Story of Biohazard, which was given away as a pre-order bonus with the Saturn version of Biohazard. The story serves as a prelude to the events of the original Resident Evil, in which Chris investigates the disappearance of his missing friend, Billy Robertson. SD. Perry has written novelizations of the first 5 games, as well as 2 original novels taking place between games. Her 7 titles are: The Umbrella Conspiracy, a novelization of the first game; Caliban Cove, an original novel set after the first game; City of the Dead, a novelization of Resident Evil 2; Underworld, another original novel set after Resident Evil 2; Nemesis, a novelization of the 3rd installment of the franchise; Code Veronica, a novelization of the homonymous game; 0 Hour, a novelization of the prequel game. The novels often took liberties with the plot of the games by exploring events occurring outside and beyond the games. This often meant that the novels would later be contradicted by the games and, on a few occasions, themselves. One notable addition from the novels is the original character Trent, who often served as a mysterious behind-the-scenes string puller who aided the main characters. Perry's novels were translated and released in Japan with new cover arts by Wolfina. Perry's novels, particularly The Umbrella Conspiracy, also alluded to events in Biohazard, The Beginning, such as the disappearance of Billy Robertson and Brian Irons' bid to run for mayor. A reprinting of Perry's novels with new cover artwork began in 2012 to coincide with the release of Resident Evil, Retribution and its respective novelization. There was also a trilogy of original Biohazard novels in Japan. Hokai no Yoju was published in 1998 and was written by Q Asakura and the staff of Flagship. 2 additional novels were published in 2002, To the Liberty by Suion Kamura and Rose Blank by Tadashi Izawa. While no official English translation of these novels has been published yet, the last 2 books were translated into German and published in 2006. Novelizations of 4 of the 5 films, Genesis, Apocalypse, Extinction and Retribution, were written by Keith R. A. DeCandido, while Retribution was written by John Shirley, though Afterlife did not receive a novelization. The Genesis novel was published over 2 years after that film's release, while the Extinction novel was released in late July 2007, 2 months before the film's release. There was also a Japanese novelization of the first film, unrelated to DeCandido's version, written by Osamu Makino. Makino also wrote 2 novels based on the game Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles. The books are a 2-part direct novelization of the game and have been published in Japanese and German only. The first novel, which was titled Biohazard, The Umbrella Chronicles Side A in Japan and Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles Chapter 1 in Germany, was released on December 22, 2007. The second novel, which was titled Biohazard, The Umbrella Chronicles Side B in Japan and Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles Chapter 2 in Germany, was published in January 2008. Reception: using horror elements, puzzle solving, and a lot of action. Most of the games in the main Resident Evil series have been released to positive reviews. Some of the games, most notably Resident Evil, Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4, have been bestowed with multiple Game of the Year honors and often placed on lists of the best video games ever made. In 2012, Complex ranked Resident Evil at number 22 on the list of the best video game franchises. That same year, G4TV called it one of the most successful series in gaming history. The series has sold 62 million units as of September 30, 2014.